the 1880s frontier town of Red Rock, a dusty outpost, surrounded by rugged mesas and endless plains, follows a fierce settler woman and a weary sheriff drawn together by land, law, and love. When greedy cattle barons try to steal what's rightfully hers, Martha Caldwell stands tall against corruption and fear, with Sheriff Amos Granger at her side. Through prairie storms, burning barns, and bullet-riddled showdowns, the two must find courage not just to fight, but to heal. What happens when the land you love becomes the battlefield for your soul? Hit play and step into the dust-blown heart of Red Rock, where every heartbeat is a fight, and every fight is a vow. Subscribe for unforgettable Western drama, slow-burn romance, and gritty emotional storytelling. The relentless sun beat down on the cracked earth of Red Rock, where weather-beaten buildings stood like relics of an unforgiving past. Sheriff Amos Granger leaned against the hitching post, squinting against the dust swirling around the saloon doors. His boots kicked up grit as he watched a group of ranch hands arguing heatedly near the general store. From across the street, a wagon creaked into town, stirring a cloud of dirt. A tall woman with sun-streaked hair and eyes sharp as hawks climbed down. Martha Caldwell's gaze swept the small frontier town with fierce purpose. Her family's land was here, and no one would steal it from her. Amos straightened, his weathered jaw tightening. Land disputes were the lifeblood of Red Rock's troubles. He knew trouble when he saw it, and Martha was trouble wrapped in a stubborn will. Their eyes met for a brief moment, two iron hearts forged in the wild. Neither knew yet the battles ahead, but the land, the law, and their own hearts would soon demand they stand together. Martha wiped sweat from her brow as she surveyed the rugged terrain stretching behind the town, Red Rock cliffs standing tall against a pale blue sky. The land her family had fought for, where every stubborn tree and the dry creek bed meant survival. She tightened her grip on the reins and looked toward the town square, where murmurs of conflict had already begun to ripple through the small crowd. Cattle barons from the neighboring ranches were pressing claims on land boundaries with little regard for the settlers' rights. Martha's jaw clenched. She wasn't about to let her family's legacy be swallowed by greed. Inside the general store, the air smelled of tobacco and dust. Townsfolk whispered heatedly, eyeing the newcomers and the sheriff with wary suspicion. The lines between friend and foe blurred with each passing day. Sheriff Amos Granger stood behind the counter, trying to keep the peace, but even his steady hands couldn't calm the growing storm. When their eyes met again, Martha nodded firmly. "I'm here to stand my ground." Amos tipped his hat in respect, a silent acknowledgement that this fight was bigger than either of them yet, one that might bind their fates closer than either expected. Later that day, the sharp report of rifle fire echoed from the hills east of town. Martha ducked instinctively, her heart hammering. Sheriff Granger stepped into the street, hand hovering near his holster. "South Ridge," he muttered. "That's Caldwell land." Martha climbed into her saddle without hesitation. "Then I'm riding." "I'm riding with you," Amos said, already mounting his chestnut mare. They galloped toward the smoke curling in the distance, the dry grass crunching beneath hooves, wind tearing at hats and collars. At the ridge, the burnt remains of a fence post smoldered like a threat. Martha dismounted, kneeling near the charred wood. That was no accident. Someone's marking lines they don't own. Sheriff Granger scanned the horizon, eyes narrowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Likely men from the Delaney Cattle Company. They've been pushing harder since the railroad survey came through. Martha's voice was steady, but her fists clenched. "This land's mine. My pa staked it fair and legal in '68. I won't lose it to bullies and bullets." Granger nodded. "They'll test you. They always do." Their eyes locked. The sheriff's face was granite, but something flickered beneath it. Respect, maybe even concern. As dusk crept in and coyotes howled in the distance, Martha placed her hand on the scorched fence line. "They want to fight," she said, voice low. "They'll get one." Granger adjusted his hat. "Then we best be ready." The saloon was quiet that night. No piano, no laughter. Just the creak of wooden floorboards and the clink of glass. Sheriff Amos Granger nursed a whiskey, his mind 1,000 miles away, back on that ridge with the stubborn woman who refused to bend. Martha Caldwell. There was something about her, her strength, the way she didn't flinch in the face of danger, the fire behind her words. She reminded him of someone he used to know, someone he'd lost. The door creaked open. Martha stepped in, her boots heavy with dust, her face pale with worry. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. Granger motioned to the seat across from him. She sat without hesitation. Between them, the oil lamp flickered, throwing soft light over tired faces. "They burned my fence," she whispered, voice thin. "They're trying to scare me." "You scared?" he asked, watching her closely. She looked up, tears glinting in her eyes but refusing to fall. "Only of losing what's left of my family." There it was, the break in her voice, the crack in her armor, and Amos felt it in his chest. A slow ache he hadn't known was still there. "You're not alone out here," he said gently. She met his gaze, something tender and raw passing between them. The saloon faded into silence. Only the sound of their breathing, the flicker of the flame, and the quiet beginning of something more. Not love yet, but the space where love could grow. Dawn broke over Red Rock like a bruise, dark clouds hanging low as if the sky itself held its breath. Martha stood at the edge of her land, the burned fence still black against the earth. A single boot print marred the soil fresh. She turned quickly, her rifle slung over one shoulder, breath sharp with worry. Someone had come too close during the night. Amos arrived on horseback, had pulled low, eyes sweeping the land. "You saw something." "Boot tracks," she said. "They were watching, testing how close they can get." He dismounted slowly. "They're pushing to see if you'll break." "I won't." Her voice trembled just enough to betray her fear. He stepped closer. "You're brave, Martha, but you don't have to fight this alone." She looked at him, really looked. The deep lines carved by sun and sorrow, the way his eyes held the weight of things unspoken. He was more than a lawman. He was a man carrying ghosts. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, softer now. Amos looked down at the boot print, then out toward the hills. "Because I've seen what it costs when a good woman stands alone." Martha's throat tightened. She wanted to ask more, but the moment passed. He touched the brim of his hat, stepping away. "We ride the land tomorrow at first light," he said. "You and me. Time we draw our own lines in this dirt." As he rode off, Martha watched his figure disappear into the dust. Her heart, once steel, now stirred like embers kissed by wind. The wind picked up that night, howling through the cottonwoods like a warning. Martha sat by her lantern with a shotgun across her lap, eyes scanning the shadows dancing on her cabin walls. Something wasn't right. The cattle had stirred earlier than usual. The chickens refused to roost. Even the dog had growled low, ears pricked toward the dark. Then footsteps. Soft, measured, close. Martha rose slowly, lifting the shotgun. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. She crept to the door, every board beneath her feet memorized. She paused, listened. A shadow moved past the window. She threw the door open, gun raised, only to find Sheriff Granger, pistol drawn, breath ragged. "Was about to knock," he muttered. "You move quieter than a fox," she whispered, lowering the gun. "I circled your land. Found signs of movement west of the barn. Whoever it was, they left fast." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His presence filled the room. Not loud, not overbearing, just solid, reliable. She poured 2 cups of coffee with a shaky hand. "Why come back?" "Because I said I'd protect you," he answered. "And because I couldn't sleep, thinking of you out here alone." They sat in silence, the tension wrapping around them like rope. Not fear, something deeper, something fragile. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice breaking ever so slightly. His hand brushed hers. Just a touch, no words, but the weight of it lingered long after the night grew quiet again. The next morning came heavy with heat and silence, the kind that wraps around your shoulders and whispers that something's coming. Martha saddled her horse with swift hands, her jaw set tight, She and Amos rode the southern ridge, land her father had fought to keep with blood and grit. The same land someone now wanted to claim without earning. She stopped near the old oak that marked the property line, a rusted nail still stuck in the bark, once used to hang her father's lantern when he worked into dusk. Amos dismounted beside her. "This place means something to you." "It's in my bones," she said quietly. "I buried Pa just over that hill, and Ma's rocking chair still sits by the fireplace, like she'll walk through the door any minute." She swallowed hard, eyes misting. They built this with nothing but calloused hands and blind faith. "I won't let it go. I can't." He stepped closer than before, and gently took the reins from her hands. "Then we stand together." Their faces were inches apart now. Neither moved. The wind kicked up dust around them. Tension hummed in the air, thick, unsaid, holy. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he said, "We'll stake new signs. You'll plant your flag, and I'll stand beside you with badge and bullet." She smiled through her pain. "That's not law. That's loyalty." "No," he said softly. "That's love. It just hasn't spoken its name yet." The blood moon rose above them, bright as fire, and something old and sacred stirred in their hearts. The sun set slow over the prairie, painting the grasses in shades of rust and gold. Martha stood on her porch, eyes scanning the horizon, where wild horses moved like ghosts against the dying light. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, raw, open, and unforgiving. But tonight it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Sheriff Granger stepped onto the porch beside her, hat in hand. He looked like part of the land, leather-worn, dust-covered, eyes shaped by wind and war. The prairie made men like him, men who didn't run. "I talked to the judge in Rockridge," he said, voice low. "Says the Delaney boys forged claims. They've got no right to your land." Martha exhaled, relief rippling through her like wind through tall grass. But she didn't smile. "They'll come anyway." "They might," Amos said, "but they won't find you alone." She looked at him then, really looked. The crease in his brow, the tired set of his shoulders, the storm behind his quiet calm. This man had seen things, lost things, and still, he stood here. "They say this land breaks the weak," she whispered, "but maybe it just shows you who's worth standing for." He turned to her, close now. Close enough she could see the flecks of gray in his beard. "Then let me stand for you." No kiss, no rush, just the weight of a promise in the prairie air. The kind that doesn't fade with morning. The kind that roots deep like cottonwoods in dry soil. The prairie air was thick with heat by midday. The kind that made the sky look too big and the ground too still. Martha walked the southern fence line with a rifle slung across her shoulder, checking posts, listening, always listening. That's when she smelled it. Smoke. Faint, distant, but real. Her boots moved faster than her thoughts, eyes scanning the horizon. A dark ribbon rose beyond the western trees, near the old Caldwell barn. She mounted her horse and rode hard, wind stinging her face as panic surged. That barn held more than tools and hay. It held her father's old survey maps, the deed, everything that proved her family's claim. When she reached the clearing, fire licked the walls. Flames clawed at the roof like angry hands. And in the distance, 3 riders turned their horses and vanished behind the ridgeline. Delaney's men. Her scream tore through the wind. Amos arrived moments later, already leaping from his saddle. Together, they fought the blaze with wet sacks and buckets, their faces streaked with soot, arms blistering from heat. By nightfall, the barn stood charred and hollow, but not everything had been lost. Martha, coughing, pulled a scorched lockbox from the rubble. Inside, the deed, singed but legible. She fell to her knees, clutching it, trembling. Amos knelt beside her, his hand gripping hers. "They tried to erase you," he said, "but you're still standing." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "And I'll die standing, if I have to." His gaze was full of fire and something else, something far more dangerous than bullets. Devotion. The storm rolled in that night without warning, thunder cracking like rifles across the prairie sky, wind howling through the canyons like a wounded beast. Rain fell hard, drumming on the roof of Martha's cabin, where two souls sat in flickering lantern light. Martha sat near the hearth, the rescue Dee drying on the table beside her. Her fingers trembled around a chipped mug of coffee. Across from her, Amos stared into the flames like a man watching ghosts dance. "I should be angry," she said, voice quiet, "but all I feel is tired." He looked at her, his voice low and rough. "You've held this land up by your bare hands. Even the strongest fall when the world won't let up." She met his gaze. "Have you ever lost something you couldn't fight for?" Amos didn't answer right away. Then, almost a whisper, "My wife, 12 winters ago. Fever took her before I got back from tracking cattle rustlers. She died waiting." Silence settled between them, deep and reverent. "I never let anyone close after that," he continued, his voice breaking like old leather. "Not until you." Lightning flashed across the window panes, lighting up his face, so open, so raw. Martha reached across the table. Her hand closed gently over his. No kiss, no vows, just the space between thunder and silence, filled with something heavy and holy. Hope. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two hearts sat steady. By morning, the rain had softened the earth. The air smelled of wet sagebrush and smoke. The fire was out, but embers still glowed in the hearth. Martha rose early, her skirts damp at the hem as she stepped outside. Amos had already saddled the horses. "They'll come back," he said, cinching the reins. "Men like Delaney don't take defeat quiet." Martha nodded, jaw set. "Then let him come. I'll be waiting." He handed her a rifle, freshly cleaned. "This time, we draw the line with more than words." They rode along the southern border, past blackened fence posts and ashes where her barn once stood. Amos stopped suddenly, kneeling in the dirt. His fingers traced something carved into the soft earth. A mark, AD-shaped with a snake curling through it. "Delaney's message," he muttered. "He wants a war." Martha's hands balled into fists. "Then we give him a reason to regret it." He looked up at her. "You sure about this? Once we start, there's no backing down." "I wasn't raised to back down," she said, steel in her voice. Amos stood slowly, the wind ruffling his coat. "Then I'll ride with you." She met his eyes. "And when it's over?" A beat of silence. Then his answer, firm and clear. "We'll build again. Together." The wind rose around them like a promise, lifting the dust. One mark in the dirt, but two hearts in the fight. The town of Red Rock held its breath as the sun dipped low, casting long, bloody shadows across the wooden storefronts. Word had spread. Delaney's men were riding in. Amos stood at the edge of town, rifle slung over his shoulder, badge gleaming dull in the fading light. Martha stood beside him, her father's revolver in her belt, her spine straight as a fence post. "You don't have to do this," Amos said, voice low. "Yes, I do," she answered without hesitation. "They burned my barn, try to break my spirit. If I let them walk in now, they'll own more than my land. They'll own my fear." He studied her for a moment. "You're braver than most men I've known." From the ridge came the sound of hooves, fast, steady, growing louder. Amos turned toward the townsfolk behind them, many with rifles or pitchforks in hand. For the first time, Red Rock stood united, not just for land, not just for law, but for a woman who refused to yield. Dust curled as the riders appeared, 6 of them, faces hard, guns ready. Delaney rode in front, smug and sure. "This don't have to end messy," he called. "Step aside." Martha stepped forward. "You're on stolen soil, Mr. Delaney. This is your only chance to turn back." Delaney laughed, spitting into the dirt. "A woman and a tired old sheriff? That's your wall." "No," Amos said, raising his rifle. "We're the line." The wind stilled. And then, the first gun fired. The first shot cracked like lightning across the prairie. Then the night exploded, gunfire flashing in bursts, echoing off storefronts and cliff walls. Martha dropped behind a barrel, returning fire with steady hands. Her heart pounded, but her aim held true. The training her father gave her, the nights he made her practice until her arms ached, it was all in her now. Amos moved like wind through the chaos, barking orders, covering townsfolk. Every shot he fired deliberate. He was a man who knew war, and how to survive it. Delaney's men pushed hard, circling behind the blacksmiths and firing blind into windows. But the town fought back. For the first time, Red Rock had something worth protecting: each other. One of Delaney's men charged toward Martha's flank, but she didn't flinch. She stood, aimed, and fired once. He dropped. She froze, the weight of it sinking in. Amos was suddenly there, grabbing her shoulder. "You all right?" The smoke cleared slowly over Red Rock, curling into the sky like ghosts finally set free. Martha stood in the middle of Main Street, hands still shaking from the fight. The dust settled on her boots, and her revolver hung heavy at her hip. Around her, the townsfolk emerged from cover, cautious, wide-eyed, and alive. She turned and found Amos watching her. His hat was missing, a cut above his brow bleeding, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held only relief. "You held your ground," he said gently. "So did you," she whispered. They walked side by side through the wreckage, broken windows, splintered wood, a shattered sign swaying over the saloon. But beneath the ruin was something deeper: unity. The town had chosen to stand. With her. At her cabin that evening, Martha lit a lantern and sat quietly by the hearth. Amos entered without knocking, the way someone does when they no longer feel like a guest. He sat beside her, silent for a long while. "I thought when this was over, I'd feel empty," she admitted. He nodded. "Sometimes peace feels like silence after too much noise. Takes time to hear your own heart again." She turned to him, eyes glassy. "And what does your heart say?" Amos looked at her, truly looked, and then took her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers like wind through tall grass. "It says I don't want to leave this place. Not if you're in it." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She leaned in, and for the first time, they kissed. A week passed since the smoke and gunfire faded from Red Rock. The town rebuilt slowly, shattered glass replaced, fences mended, spirits stitched back together like patchwork. Life, though still hard, felt steadier. Martha stood in the field behind her cabin, where scorched grass was already greening beneath the morning dew. The land had survived, just like her. Amos approached on horseback, reins loose in his hand, that familiar, worn look in his eyes softened by something new: peace. He dismounted and joined her, boots crunching softly in the prairie dirt. "Judge sent word," he said. "Delaney's claims were stripped. His ranch is up for auction. Town council's talking about electing a permanent sheriff." Martha smiled. Wouldn't be a bad thing, having someone honest in that badge. He raised an eyebrow. "You offering?" She chuckled, then looked out over her land. "I've got my hands full rebuilding this place." He stepped closer. "What if we rebuilt it together?" Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the quiet way he said it. Like he wasn't asking for her hand, but for her life, her storms, her silence, her stubbornness. "You sure about that, Sheriff Granger?" He took her hand in both of his. "Martha Caldwell, I've never been sure of anything in my damn life." She looked at their hands, the prairie around them, the wide sky above, and nodded. "Then let's build something that lasts." Behind them, the sun rose, casting gold over Red Rock, over the scarred land, and the people too tough to quit. Iron hearts, open skies, a love forged by fire, and still standing. She nodded slowly. "I had no choice." "You never do in a fight like this," he said, "but you did what you had to." Smoke hung heavy in the air, but the shooting began to fade. Only a few stray cracks, then silence. The last of Delaney's men broke and fled into the dark. Delaney himself knelt in the dust, wounded, glaring up at Amos and Martha. Amos holstered his gun. This town doesn't belong to fear anymore. And for the first time since she arrived, Martha felt it. Peace. Sharp and beautiful like the morning after storm. If Iron Hearts of Red Rock stirred your spirit, Share the journey with someone who believes in second chances and stubborn love. Like, comment, and hit that bell icon for more Western love stories as raw and real as the prairie itself.